If I think of my life as a class and what I've really learned, I've learned a few things. First, I'm aware that I'm a child of God. It's such an amazing understanding to think that the it, which made fleas and mountains and rivers and stars, made me. What I prayed for is humility, to know that there is something greater than I. Then I have to know that the brute, the bigot, and the batterer are all children of God, whether they know it or not. And I'm supposed to treat them accordingly. And it's hard, and I blow it all the time.
Mongrel class of people.
I'd like everybody to think of a statement by Terence. The statement is, I am a human being. Nothing human can be alien to me.
Good evening. Welcome to another edition of the Queen's Grapevine. This is your host, Wallingford Lee. Tonight, the spotlight is on the great poet, author, writer, Maya Angelou. We just lost her in May 2014. This great woman, writer, actor, dancer. I want to take the opportunity to talk to someone who can help us bring a little light to you or community, just exactly who was Maya and some of the interesting things that she did as an activist, as a poet, as a writer, and how many people she touched here in this land before she left. It gives us a great deal of pleasure and, of course, satisfaction to have our guest on our show today. We're talking about Professor Mary Phillips, who has been on our show before. And we want to spend the next half an hour talking a little bit about Maya and some of the things that she's done. Welcome to our show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back.
Well, it's been a while. I was away on vacation, and so were you, so we wanted to get you back. Just exactly in our consciousness, just exactly who's Maya Angelou?
Yeah, well, Maya Angelou, she was born Marguerite Johnson. She was an educator, she was a poet, she was a writer, she was a voracious reader, she was a dancer, she was a filmmaker, she was a civil rights activist. She is someone that you can say has done it all, right?
Wow.
She was primarily raised by her paternal grandmother, who was very much the foundation, one of the centerpieces of her life. She spent a lot of time being raised in St. Louis, Missouri, as well as Stamps, Arkansas. And she talks about this in depth in her book, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. It's funny because the way you get to her name is a very interesting story. Her brother, Bailey, at the time, he was young and he couldn't say Marguerite. And so he said, Maya sister, Maya sister,
Wow.
Maya sister.
Wow. Okay.
And it kind of, stuck. And as he was able to start pronouncing the name, it kind of turned into Maya.
Wow.
So that's
Wow.
kind of, the history
Where it came
behind,
about.
as well. So, later on in life, Maya Angelou, she had a very painful part of her history when she stayed with her mother in St. Louis. She was raped when she was 8 years old several times by her mother's boyfriend, and he was later killed. And
By a family member?
Right. And, she took it very personally because she felt like since she spoke out, since she used her voice, this is what got him killed. And so as a result, she stopped talking and she actually became mute.
How long was the mute went on for?
I would, roughly, say about a half a year.
Wow.
When she...
There must have been something very traumatic that affected her, a child going through something like that, raped at a very young age by some bastard. It's not an easy thing.
Yeah, horrific. And a well-known woman of the town because her grandmother actually owned a store, a convenience store in Stamps, Arkansas. So, she was able to learn basic skills that you would learn by running a store. She also went to school, so she was very good in mathematics and what have you, working with others, all those kinds of things. And a black aristocrat. She was what she called the lady of the town. Miss Bertha Flowers met with her. Her grandmother told her that she wanted to have a meeting with her, and she took her to her home, and she was just, in awe that, she was able to go to this person's house that she highly respected. And she told her basically, she introduced her to poetry for the very first time.
Wow. Wow. Okay.
And she told her not only to learn the poetry, but to recite it out loud. She also gave her books, and she read books out loud to her, and she told her to read the books aloud. And she told her, poetry is like music using the human voice. And that really stuck to her, right? And so that has a lot to do with her being able to kind of recapture that voice and understand the importance of poetry.
So that's where that type of love for the poetry begins, right there. But let's go back to Arkansas. Been in the South that it was. Was there any racial issues that she kind of passed through as a young child, or she saw things that stayed in her mind, or she wrote anything about those things?
Yeah, she wrote a lot about those particular issues, being raised in Stamps, Arkansas, during the time of Jim Crow segregation, right? Well, lynchings were at its height, right? She talks a lot about her Uncle Willie. And, anytime there was, word out that, some white man was looking for a black man, because of rape or because of taking white womanhood or what have you. There's a story that she recounts in her book about her Uncle Willie in hiding. They put him in hiding at the convenience store because he was afraid that they would come for him, because they was coming for every black man that fit the description. And so she tells this story, and she tells other stories of black men in that same kind of situation. And she talks about what it was like in her black neighborhood versus the times when she had to cross over to the right neighborhood, and how scared she was and how horrific it was for her. And so the racism, the Jim Crow segregation of the period, like I said, the lynchings, the horror, and this is in the period of the Great Depression as well. And so you have all of this affecting her as well. She talks about race relations in the book, and in relation to that, she talks about how white people wasn't real to her, for a period of time. They didn't seem real to her, right? And she talks about white children coming into her mother's grocery store and taunting and humiliating her grandmother, and how she couldn't say anything, and her grandmother couldn't protect herself, let alone her son and her children or what have you. But they would come in and refer to her by her name instead of by her last name, and just pick at her.
Disrespectful.
Completely disrespectful. And she talks about how her grandmother told her, she calls her mother in a book, but how her grandmother kind of told her to stay out the way for that particular incident, and how she wanted to just pinch the children and talk back. She was a strong advocate of self-defense.
But it's very important to understand that what America was at that time, I call it the Achilles heel, where they would see another human of a different color, and I don't even know if you're a second or third class citizen, and the total disrespect for another human if you didn't have the same color. And we're talking about supposedly the most powerful country in the world, where there's education, and how people from a different color was looked at and treated in such a barbaric manner that it's difficult to understand. And these things are in the books. It's not things that we're making up here and stuff like that. How brutal the South was. Guys like that just lynch, rape, do whatever they wanted to, and got away with it. And it's important to know that Maya was a self-made woman, okay? She was a self-made woman who opened up all different doors and overcame all these type of things that she saw in the South. And she traveled all over the place. She went to as far as Egypt, she went to Ghana, so she have accomplished a lot. I would like to take this opportunity as we break for a few seconds, a few minutes. Could you read one of our poems for us before we go into our half, please?
Well, I'm going to read one of the most famous of her poems, Phenomenal Woman. Pretty women wonder where my secret lies. I'm not cute or built to suit a fashion model size. But when I start to tell them, they think I'm telling lies. I say, it's in the reach of my arms, the span of my hips, the stride of my step, the curl of my lips. I'm a woman, phenomenal woman. That's me. I walk into a room just as cool as you please. And to a man, the fellows stand or fall down on their knees. Then they swarm around me, a hive of honeybees. I say, it's the fire in my eyes and the flash of my teeth, the swing in my waist and the joy in my feet. I'm a woman, phenomenal woman. That's me. Men themselves have wondered what they see in me. They try so much, but they can't touch my inner mystery. When I try to sew them, they say they can't still see. I say, it's in the arc of my back, the sun of my smile, the ride of my breast, the grace of my style. I'm a woman, phenomenal woman. That's me. Now you understand just why my head's not bowed. I don't shout or jump about or have to talk real loud. When you see me passing, it ought to make you proud. I say, it's in the click of my heels, the bend of my hair, the palm of my hand, the need for my care. 'Cause I'm a woman, phenomenal woman. That's me.
And we'll be right back in the Queen's Grapevine as we continue talking about the amazing life and the accomplishment of this great poet, Maya Angelou. We'll be right back on the Grapevine.
The hells we have lived through and live through still have sharpened our senses and toughened our will.
Celebrated poet and activist Maya Angelou may have been speaking about herself on that day in 1995. Born Marguerite Annie Johnson in St. Louis, Missouri, April 4th, 1928, the hells she lived through began at the age of 7, when she was raped by her mother's boyfriend. After she spoke out against him, he was beaten to death by a mob. Young Marguerite blamed herself.
I was 7.5, and my 7.5-year-old logic deduced that my voice had killed him. So I stopped speaking for almost 6 years.
And it was during those years of silence that she discovered poetry and her love of art.
And somehow I'm able to get down inside myself, deep where a poem may live, and find out what it has to say.
Her poetry was first physical, winning a dance and drama scholarship in San Francisco, then later touring Europe in 1954 in Porgy and Bess. But her growing love for the written word took her to Egypt and Ghana, where she became a newspaper editor. In Ghana, she met Malcolm X and returned to the U.S. in 1964 to join his fight in the civil rights movement. After Malcolm X's assassination, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. asked her to join him. He was killed on her birthday, 1968. The following year, her first memoir was published, I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings. More bestsellers would follow.
I want to write so well that a person has 30 or 40 pages in a book of mine before she realizes she's reading.
Her books detailed personal struggles, like having a baby as an unwed teenager. That son later became novelist Guy Johnson.
Cut.
Blazing trails on the big and small screens, she directed documentaries. Her screenplay for 1972's Georgia, Georgia was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. And in 1977, she appeared in the landmark TV adaptation of Alex Haley's Roots.
I can grow as tall as a tree, and I will still be your grandmother.
Maya Angelou was nominated for a Tony Award. She won 3 Grammys, and in 2011, President Barack Obama presented her with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Former President Bill Clinton awarded her the Presidential Medal of Arts in 2000. Years earlier, at his request, she had written a poem for his inauguration.
Here, on the pulse of this new day, you may have the grace to look up and out and into your sister's eyes.
She called herself Maya, which was her brother's nickname for her. Angelou came from her first husband's name, Tosh Angelos.
It is a long journey. It's a sweet one, bittersweet. I'm very blessed.
She had created her own name just as she had created poetry from pieces of herself.
Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise. Into a daybreak miraculously clear, I rise. Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the hope and the dream of the slave. And so, naturally, there I go rising.
And we're back here in the Queen's Grapevine as we continue talking a little bit about the great life of Maya Angelou, her accomplishments, her legacy, that wonderful poet, writer, actor, dancer, who touched so many lives in America, not just the black community, a self-made woman, and her life was cut short, but we have so much memory of her in our poetries, our books, and our great accomplishment. Professor Mary Phillips has been kind enough here to be your special guest to recite one of her poems that you just heard and to talk a little bit to her life. How big and how strong was her writing?
Oh my gosh. I mean, when you talk about a remarkable writer, she definitely comes to mind. The way she's able to paint a picture, the way she's able to use words, the way she's able to capture the essence of the black struggle and what it means to be a black woman living in America, right? So many of her quotes are, jotted down in history. She was able to use words so eloquently. You could actually study her in a class on writing to become a stronger writer. She really gives you that strong visual, right? As you read I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings or any of her writings, you feel like you are wherever she's at, experiencing it firsthand.
And she touched you also with our words and our poetry, of course.
Absolutely, absolutely. And she was good friends with James Baldwin, and he actually encouraged her.
Another great one.
Yeah, he actually encouraged her to write I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings.
Wow,
right?
amazing.
So.
My understanding also that she had the opportunity to live in Harlem for a little bit. Did she ever got involved in the New York scene in any way?
Yeah, of course she did, right? Mm-hmm. When she first came to Harlem, she joined a group that was all about writers, right? The Harlem Writers Guild. And she, developed a network and connected with other people in the Harlem scene. She actually did several off-Broadway productions. She toured in Europe doing the opera Porgy and Bess. She actually got involved in filmmaking as well. Wow. She directed a particular film later on down in the Delta, but prior to that, she was in Alex Haley's Roots, right? Wow. She was also in John Singleton's Poetic Justice.
Another great producer.
That was done in the 90s, and that's an important piece because most youth at that time, that was their first exposure to not only Maya Angelou, right, on a nationwide level, but one of the few films that integrates poetry so nicely into the script to the point where the poetry is actually its own soundtrack. Right, there's many scenes in that movie with Janet Jackson just kind of saying her poetry, and there's no music in the background because poetry was indeed the soundtrack. And almost similar to when Spike Lee did Malcolm X, when John Singleton did Poetic Justice, there was a renewed interest in Maya Angelou, right? I know from personal experience, my sister, that was the movie where my sister was, very much interested and read voraciously Maya Angelou's poetry and became very interested in her life. So,
what year would you say she really came into this, into her own? I mean, because she's been working for a long time, her poetry, but when would you say her books and her poetry and her writings became like, boom, hit?
I would say in the 50s, around the early 60s, in that particular period, is when you really started to see her develop. It's hard to really channel a particular year, right? Because even when you look at her work during the 1970s, she was constantly giving us more in the world, right? Even when you look at, her in music, right? She worked with some of the greats. She even collaborated with Quincy Jones, right? She wrote for B.B. King, right? She wrote, she did an album with Valerie and Nick Ashford,
great
Simpson,
writers, great writers.
and they did a whole album together, where she featured some of her poetry, right? So she has done it all. Broadway, right?
Movies.
She's won Grammys, 3 Grammys. One of those was for A Phenomenal Woman. Right? She, got over 50 doctorate degrees. Can you imagine?
Wow.
Over 50 doctorate degrees, right?
Wow.
In addition to that, she went over to Ghana, worked at, a university in Ghana. That's where she met Malcolm X, right? And she actually returned from Ghana in 1964 to help Malcolm X form the Organization of Afro-American Unity. Many people don't know that she was actually helping him, and she was very much a nationalist and very much in support of Malcolm X as well as Martin Luther King. But throughout her life, she believed in standing up for yourself and fighting back. That's part of her legacy.
So for all intents and purposes, she's an activist. She was truly involved in the movement in more ways than one.
Oh, yeah. You can even call her a cultural activist because she brought so much of the arts in her activism, right? When Martin Luther King asked her to be the Northern Coordinator for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, she was going to step into that role, but he happened to be assassinated on her birthday.
Wow.
In that same year.
And for many years, she would not celebrate her birthday after the fact that Martin Luther King got killed on her birthday.
Yeah, it was pretty traumatizing. So Maya Angelou has been respected and covered nationwide, and we all have some understanding of her contributions to our nation. I still think many parts of her life, right, have not really come to the fore, particularly her civil rights activist, nationalist ideas. Her part of her legacy and her history, she's in line with, the women in the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement. You could literally put her in that same trajectory because she was a huge advocate of standing up for what's right. And one of the many things that I remember in the many, national television specials that's been on Maya Angelou, I remember one time her saying, if you don't speak up, you're not doing anything to move us forward. If you just...
staying backwards.
Yeah, stay in silence doesn't get us anywhere, so.
Well, Professor Phillips, I want to take this opportunity on behalf of the family of Grapevine to thank you so much for bringing out these things, because I think it's important to young America, who those might have been sleeping or don't know who she is. We don't have words to thank you for sharing all this information to us.
Thank you.
And again, folks, before I sign off, I'll say to you, I make a challenge to you, you youngsters, black, white, or whatever race you are. Get on the internet, find out who this amazing woman is. Get to her books. Learn a little bit about what a true American is, this woman is. It's not about color, but how strong, how powerful, and what type of person she was, and what type of a difference she has made in her lifetime. And again, this is Wallingford Lee saying good night for the Queen's Grapevine. And I hope that this program has been to your liking. Good night.
The hells we have lived through and live through still have sharpened our senses and toughened our will.
Celebrated poet and activist Maya Angelou may have been speaking about herself on that day in 1995. Born Marguerite Annie Johnson in St. Louis, Missouri, April 4, 1928, the hells she lived through began at the age of 7, when she was raped by her mother's boyfriend. After she spoke out against him, he was beaten to death by a mob. Young Marguerite blamed herself.
I was 7.5, and my 7.5-year-old logic deduced that my voice had killed him. So I stopped speaking for almost 6 years.
And it was during those years of silence that she discovered poetry and her love of art.
And somehow I'm able to get down inside myself, deep where a poem may live, and find out what it has to say.
Her poetry was first physical, winning a dance and drama scholarship in San Francisco, then later touring Europe in 1954 in Porgy and Bess. But her growing love for the written word took her to Egypt and Ghana, where she became a newspaper editor. In Ghana, she met Malcolm X and returned to the U.S. in 1964 to join his fight in the civil rights movement. After Malcolm X's assassination, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. asked her to join him. He was killed on her birthday, 1968. The following year, her first memoir was published, I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings. More bestsellers would follow.
I want to write so well that a person is 30 or 40 pages in a book of mine before she realizes she's reading.
Her books detailed personal struggles, like having a baby as an unwed teenager. That son later became novelist Guy Johnson.
Cut.
Blazing trails on the big and small screens, she directed documentaries. Her screenplay for 1972's Georgia, Georgia was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. And in 1977, she appeared in the landmark TV adaptation of Alex Haley's Roots.
And grow as tall as a tree, and I will still be your grandmother.
Maya Angelou was nominated for a Tony Award. She won 3 Grammys, and in 2011, President Barack Obama presented her with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Former President Bill Clinton awarded her the Presidential Medal of Arts in 2000. Years earlier, at his request, she had written a poem for his inauguration.
Here, on the pulse of this new day, you may have the grace to look up and out and into your sister's eyes.
She called herself Maya, which was her brother's nickname for her. Angelou came from her first husband's name, Tosh Angelos.
It is a long journey. It's a sweet one, bittersweet. I'm very blessed.
She had created her own name just as she had created poetry from pieces of herself.
Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise. Into a daybreak miraculously clear, I rise. Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the hope and the dream of the slave. And so, naturally, there I go rising.